480 BC, a narrow mountain pass. 300 warriors standing against the largest army the world had ever seen. And they knew they were going to die. This isn't just another ancient battle story. This is about the moment that changed Western civilization forever. Because what happened at Thermopylae wasn't supposed to be possible. 300 men held off over 100,000 for 3 days straight. And the craziest part? That was the plan all along. I'm talking about the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartans against the entire Persian Empire. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this battle matters so much that we're still talking about it 2,500 years later. But here's what nobody tells you about Thermopylae. The 300 Spartans? They weren't alone. The actual story is way more complicated and honestly way more interesting than anything Hollywood showed you. And there's one detail about how Leonidas chose his 300 warriors that's going to completely change how you see this battle. But I need to set the stage first. So let me break down what actually happened at Thermopylae, why the Spartans chose to die, and the one betrayal that changed everything. Let's go back to 480 BC. Persia was the superpower of the ancient world. We're talking about an empire that stretched from India to Egypt. Modern-day Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Egypt, parts of Greece, all of it under one guy. King Xerxes. And Xerxes had a problem with Greece. See, 10 years earlier, his father Darius tried to conquer Greece and got completely embarrassed at a place called Marathon. You know, the reason we have marathon races? Yeah, that marathon. A Greek messenger ran 26 miles to Athens to announce the victory and then dropped dead. That's how insane that battle was. And Persia lost. Lost badly. Xerxes grew up hearing about that defeat. His whole childhood, everyone in Persia was talking about how the Greeks humiliated them. So when he became king, he decided he was going to finish what his father started. But this time, he wasn't taking any chances. He was bringing everyone. The numbers are still debated today, but ancient sources say Xerxes brought over 1 million men. Modern historians think it was probably closer to 150 to 300,000. But even if we take the lower estimate, that's still the biggest army anyone had ever seen at that point in history. This wasn't a military campaign. This was an invasion force meant to erase Greece from existence. Think of it like this. Imagine a tidal wave approaching a small beach town. You can see it coming from miles away, this massive wall of water towering over everything. The people on the beach have two choices: run and abandon everything, or grab whatever they can and try to build a barrier knowing it probably won't be enough. That's what the Greeks were facing, and the Greeks knew it was coming. They had spies. They had scouts. Everyone knew Xerxes was preparing something massive. The question was what to do about it. And this is where things get complicated, because Greece wasn't one country. It was dozens of city-states that usually hated each other. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. They all had their own governments, their own armies, their own interests. Getting them to work together was like herding cats. But they tried. They formed an alliance. The Hellenic League, they called it. And they had to figure out where to stop the Persians. They couldn't fight them in an open field. The Persian army was too big. They'd get crushed. So they needed a choke point. Somewhere the Persians couldn't use their numbers. Somewhere narrow. Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a mountain pass in central Greece, about 100 miles north of Athens. On one side, steep mountains. On the other side, the sea. And in between, a passage so narrow that at some points, only a dozen men could walk side by side. It was perfect. The Persians could send 1,000 men through at once, but only the ones in front could actually fight. The rest would just be standing there waiting. But choosing Thermopylae meant something else. Something darker. And the Spartans knew it from the beginning. I'll tell you what the oracle predicted about this battle in just a moment, because that prophecy is what made Leonidas' decision even more insane. This is where the Spartan king Leonidas comes in. Now, Sparta was different from every other Greek city. While Athens had democracy and philosophy and art, Sparta had one thing: warriors. From age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and put through the most brutal training program ever created. They called it the Agoge. 23 years of pure military conditioning. Learning to fight, to endure pain, to survive with nothing. There's a famous story about a Spartan boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When he got caught, the fox started biting him, tearing into his stomach. But the boy didn't make a sound, didn't even flinch. He just stood there and let the fox kill him rather than admit he got caught. That's how hardcore Spartan training was. Pain didn't matter. Weakness was worse than death. And here's something I think about sometimes. We look at stories like that and think it's impressive, right? Ultimate discipline. But when I really sit with it, it makes me uncomfortable. Because that's a child. A kid who was so terrified of showing weakness that he let an animal eat him alive. That's not strength. That's trauma. And Sparta built an entire civilization on that trauma. They took boys from their mothers and broke them down and rebuilt them as weapons. And yeah, it made them the most feared warriors in the ancient world. But what cost? Every Spartan soldier at Thermopylae had gone through that same process. They'd all been that boy with the fox at some point. They'd all learned that their lives mattered less than their reputation. And maybe that's what made them able to do what they did. But it also makes you wonder what kind of society produces people who can walk calmly towards certain death without hesitation. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's complicated. And we should acknowledge that. So when Leonidas was chosen to command the forces at Thermopylae, everyone knew what that meant. This guy had been training for war his entire life. He was in his 50s, a veteran of countless battles, and he was one of Sparta's two kings. And Leonidas understood something that most people miss about Thermopylae. This wasn't about winning. This was about buying time. See, when the Persians were marching south, it was late summer. And Greece had this religious festival called the Carnia. During the Carnia, Spartans weren't allowed to go to war. It was sacred law. Plus, the Olympic Games were happening at the same time. So most of the Greek city-states couldn't send their full armies. They needed a few more weeks to get ready. Thermopylae was the delay. Hold the pass long enough for the rest of Greece to mobilize. Hold it long enough for Athens to evacuate its people. Hold it long enough for the Greek navy to get into position. That was the mission, and Leonidas knew it was a one-way trip. Now here's that prophecy I mentioned. Before Leonidas left Sparta, he consulted the oracle at Delphi, and the oracle told him that either Sparta would be destroyed or a Spartan king would die. Those are the only two options. The city survives or you do. Not both. So Leonidas knew before he even left home that he wasn't coming back. The gods had already decided, and he went anyway. But here's the thing that movies always get wrong. Leonidas didn't bring 300 random Spartans. He brought 300 Spartiates. That's the official term. These were full Spartan citizens who had completed the agoge and earned the right to fight. But more importantly, Leonidas specifically chose 300 men who all had living sons. Because Spartan law said your line had to continue. If you died, your son would carry on your name and your property. Leonidas hand-picked 300 fathers who were ready to die because their families would survive them. Think about that for a second. He didn't choose the strongest warriors. He didn't choose the youngest or the fastest. He chose fathers, men with kids at home, men who had something to lose. Because those were the men who understood what they were fighting for. And those were the men whose families would carry the story forward after they were gone. And that choice, that specific criterion, is going to matter in a way you probably don't expect. Because one of those fathers did something at Thermopylae that nobody talks about. But I need to tell you about the battle first. Leonidas walked through Sparta and looked men in the eyes and said, "You're coming with me, and you're not coming back." And every single one of them said yes. No hosetastion. Because that's what it meant to be Spartan. Your city came first. Always. But again, the 300 Spartans weren't alone. This is super important because the myth makes it seem like it was just Sparta against Persia, and that's not true. Leonidas also brought about 7,000 other Greek soldiers. There were Thespians, about 700 of them. There were Thebans, about 400. There were soldiers from Corinth and Phocis and a bunch of other city-states. So the real number was somewhere around 7,000 Greeks total. But the Spartans were the elite force. They were the tip of the spear. And everyone knew that if the Spartans were willing to die here, then this position mattered. Other Greeks saw the Spartans and thought, okay, if they're willing to make this stand, we should too. That's the power Sparta had. Their reputation alone inspired people. So the Greeks set up at Thermopylae and waited. And when Xerxes arrived with his massive army, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A few thousand Greeks blocking his path. He sent a scout to check it out, and the scout came back with this wild report. He said the Spartans were exercising and combing their long hair. Just hanging out, getting ready like this was a normal day. Now, this detail is bizarre until you understand what it meant. Spartans grew their hair long as a symbol of being free men, and before battle, they would comb it and braid it carefully. It was a ritual. They were making themselves beautiful for death, preparing their bodies like you'd prepare a sacrifice for the gods. To Xerxes, it looked insane. To the Spartans, it was the most natural thing in the world. If you're about to achieve a beautiful death, you should look the part. Xerxes thought it was a joke. He sent a messenger to Leonidas with an offer. Surrender your weapons, and I'll let you live. And Leonidas sent back 2 words. Molenlebe, come and take them. It's one of the most famous phrases in history. Come and take them. It's still used today as a symbol of defiance. Military units use it. Gun rights activists use it. Because those 2 words capture the entire Spartan philosophy. We're not surrendering. If you want our weapons, you're going to have to kill us first. Xerxes waited 4 days, thinking the Greeks would lose their nerve and leave. But they didn't move. So on the 5th day, he sent his troops in. And this is where the battle actually starts. And this is also where we see exactly why the Greeks chose this specific location, because what happened next shouldn't have been physically possible. The first wave was the Medes, soldiers from what's now Iran. They marched into the pass expecting an easy fight. What they got was a massacre. The Greeks had the perfect defensive position. The Persians could only attack from the front, and they couldn't spread out. So thousands of them were packed together, barely able to move, while the Greeks just systematically cut them down. Spartan warfare was based on the phalanx formation. Picture a wall of shields, each one overlapping the next. Behind the shields, spears sticking out, 8 feet long, bronze-tipped. If you were a Persian soldier running at that wall, you'd see nothing but shields and spear points. And if you tried to break through, you'd have to get past 7 or 8 rows of men, all working together like a machine. It was basically impenetrable from the front. And the Spartans weren't just holding their ground. They were tactical geniuses. They'd pretend to retreat, and the Persians would chase them, thinking they were winning. Then the Spartans would suddenly turn around and attack, catching the Persians off guard. This happened over and over. The Persians would advance, the Spartans would fall back, then the Spartans would turn and slaughter them. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. The first day of battle ended with the Persians retreating. They'd sent wave after wave of soldiers, and none of them could break through. Xerxes was furious. He'd brought the greatest army in the world, and a few thousand Greeks were making him look like an idiot. So on the 2nd day, he sent in his elite troops, the Immortals. These were the Persian Empire's absolute best warriors, 10,000 strong, and they were called Immortals because whenever one died, he was immediately replaced. The unit always stayed at 10,000. They were supposed to be unbeatable. They had the best training, the best equipment, the best everything. If anyone could break through the Greek lines, it was them. They couldn't. The Immortals hit that Spartan phalanx and got destroyed just like everyone else. The pass was too narrow. Their numbers didn't matter. Their skills didn't matter. They were fighting in a meat grinder, and the Greeks were on the winning side. By the end of day 2, the Persians had lost thousands of men, and the Greeks had barely taken any casualties. Xerxes was starting to panic. But there was something happening behind the scenes that nobody at Thermopylae knew about yet. A local shepherd was watching the battle from the mountains, and he was about to make a choice that would kill every single Greek defender. But his reason for doing it? That's the part that's going to make you angry. And this is when everything changed. A local Greek guy named Ephialtes showed up at the Persian camp. He was from the area around Thermopylae, so he knew the mountains. And he knew something the Persians didn't. There was another path, a secret mountain trail called the Anapaea Path. It went around the pass. If the Persians sent troops up that trail, they could come down behind the Greeks and trap them. Ephialtes offered to show Xerxes the way, in exchange for money. Here's the thing about Ephialtes that makes this even worse. He wasn't some random traitor. He was a Greek. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that if the Persians got through Thermopylae, they'd burn Athens. They'd enslave thousands of people. They'd destroy Greek civilization. And he did it anyway. For gold. Some ancient sources say Ephialtes was deformed and had been rejected from serving in the Greek army. And that's why he betrayed them. Revenge for being excluded. If that's true, it means the entire course of Western civilization almost got derailed because one guy got his feelings hurt and decided to sell out his entire culture for spite money. Think about how insane that is. Everything you know about democracy, philosophy, science, art, all of it nearly got erased because one dude was bitter about not being allowed to fight. This is the betrayal that doomed the 300. Ephialtes sold out Greece for Persian gold. His name became a curse word in Greek. Even today, the word Ephialtes in Greek means nightmare. That's how much they hated him. One guy, motivated by greed and spite, changed everything. Xerxes sent the immortals up the mountain that night. There were Greek soldiers guarding the path, about 1,000 Phocians. But they weren't expecting an attack. When they heard the Persians coming, they fell back without putting up much of a fight. They thought they could regroup and warn Leonidas. But it was too late. By dawn, the Persians were moving into position behind the Greek lines. When Leonidas found out, he knew it was over. They were about to be surrounded. If the Persians got behind them, everyone would die. So he made a decision. Most of the Greek forces would retreat. They'd go back south, save themselves, and join the main Greek army. But the Spartans would stay, along with the Thespians who volunteered to stay and the Thebans who were probably forced to stay as hostages. About 1,400 men total. They would hold the pass as long as possible to give everyone else time to escape. This is the moment. This is what Thermopylae is really about. Leonidas knew he was going to die. His men knew they were going to die. They had no illusions about it. But they stayed anyway because that's what the mission required. Sacrifice for the greater good. There's this thing in Sparta called a beautiful death. It was the highest honor a Spartan could achieve. To die in battle, fighting for your city, with your shield in your hand and your brothers beside you. That was glory. That was immortality. Leonidas and his 300 were about to earn the most beautiful death in history. But remember how I said Leonidas chose 300 fathers? Here's where that matters. There was one Spartan named Aristodemus who was at Thermopylae. He got an eye infection so bad he couldn't see, couldn't fight. Leonidas ordered him to go home with the retreating forces. So Aristodemus left. He survived. He went back to Sparta. And when he got there, everyone called him a coward. The man who lived when he should have died. They refused to speak to him, wouldn't look at him. His own family was ashamed. He'd been given permission to leave by his king, and it didn't matter. Because he lived and his brothers died, he was marked as a coward for the rest of his life. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, Aristodemus fought so recklessly, so desperately to prove himself, that he died in one of the most violent charges of the entire battle. He was trying to erase the shame of surviving Thermopylae. But even then, Sparta didn't honor him. They said he died well, but he died seeking death, and that's not the same as dying with honor. His name is still remembered as the Spartan who trembled, the survivor. That's what living cost him. Everything. On the third day, the Persians attacked from both sides, front and back, surrounding the Greeks completely. And the Spartans fought like demons. They abandoned the phalanx formation because it didn't matter anymore. They couldn't hold a line when enemies were coming from every direction. So they just fought. Hand-to-hand, brutal, vicious combat. When their spears broke, they used swords. When their swords broke, they used their hands and teeth. Leonidas was killed in the fighting. The Spartans tried to recover his body, and a massive brawl broke out over his corpse. The Greeks fought so hard to protect their king's body that they actually succeeded 4 times in pulling him away from the Persians, and 4 times the Persians pushed them back. It was chaos. Men screaming, blood everywhere, bodies piling up, so high you could barely move. Eventually, the remaining Spartans retreated to a small hill. They made their last stand there. By this point, most of them were wounded. They'd been fighting for 3 days straight with almost no rest. They were exhausted, bleeding, surrounded by an army that outnumbered them 100 to 1. And they still didn't surrender. The Persians stopped trying to fight them hand to hand. It was too costly, so they just stood back and fired arrows. Thousands and thousands of arrows. So many that one Spartan had joked earlier in the battle that the arrows would block out the sun. Another Spartan, a guy named Dionysus, had the perfect response. Good, then we'll fight in the shade. That quote gets repeated a lot, but think about what it actually means. They knew the arrows were coming. They knew that's how they'd die. And they joked about it anyway. Not because they were fearless, but because fear didn't matter anymore. They'd already accepted death. Once you've fully accepted that you're not walking away, fear loses its power. And that's what made them so dangerous. They had nothing left to lose. When the arrows finally stopped and the dust cleared, every single Greek defender was dead. All 1,400 of them. The Spartans, the Thespians, everyone. They fought until there was literally nobody left standing. The Persians had won the battle, but it cost them dearly. Ancient sources say they lost 20,000 men at Thermopylae. Modern historians think it was probably lower, maybe around 10,000. But even that is massive. 10,000 dead soldiers just to get through one mountain pass. And it took 3 days. Xerxes was so angry that he had Leonidas' body desecrated. He cut off his head and stuck it on a spear as a warning to other Greeks, which was completely against Persian custom, by the way. The Persians usually respected enemy warriors and gave them proper burials. But Xerxes was so furious about what the Spartans had done to his army that he broke his own rules. That alone tells you how much the Battle of Thermopylae hurt him. Not just physically, but psychologically. The Spartans had gotten under his skin. But here's the thing. The Greeks won. Not at Thermopylae. They lost that battle. But they won the war. Because Leonidas and his 300 bought enough time for the rest of Greece to prepare. The Athenian navy was able to evacuate Athens and fight the Persians at sea in the Battle of Salamis, where they crushed the Persian fleet. Without Thermopylae, there would have been no Salamis. Without Salamis, Persia would have conquered Greece. And if Persia had conquered Greece, everything changes. Western civilization, as we know, it doesn't exist. Democracy doesn't spread. Philosophy doesn't develop the same way. Science, art, literature, all of it shaped by Greek culture gone. The entire trajectory of human history hinged on 7,000 Greeks holding a mountain pass for 3 days. That's why Thermopylae matters. It wasn't about winning a battle. It was about buying time for an idea to survive. The idea that free people can stand against tyrants and win. The idea that sometimes one person's choice, one group's sacrifice, can change the course of everything that comes after. After the war, the Greeks put up a monument at Thermopylae, a stone lion for Leonidas, and an inscription that's been quoted ever since. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie. They didn't say we died heroes or we were brave. They said we were obedient, because to a Spartan, following orders and doing your duty was the highest virtue. They were told to hold the pass, and they held it until every last man was dead. Mission accomplished. The Battle of Thermopylae proved something that empires have learned over and over throughout history. You can have the biggest army, the best weapons, all the resources in the world. But if your enemy is willing to sacrifice everything for what they believe in, if they're willing to stand and die rather than surrender, you're in for a fight. Numbers don't always win. Sometimes it's about who wants it more. And the Spartans wanted it more than anyone. That's why we still remember 300 warriors from 2,500 years ago, because they showed the world what courage actually looks like. Not charging into battle thinking you'll win, but standing your ground knowing you'll lose because someone has to, because your city needs time, because your people need hope, because sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to surrender, even when surrender is the smart choice. Especially when surrender is the smart choice. Thermopylae wasn't a victory. It was something better. It was a statement. And that statement echoed through history and changed everything. The 300 Spartans became more powerful in death than they ever were in life. They became proof that some things matter more than survival, that some stands have to be made even when logic says to run. that sometimes the most important thing you can do is buy time for someone else to win the fight you started. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that we should all be willing to die, but that we should be willing to stand for something bigger than ourselves when it matters. Even when it's hard, even when it costs us, especially then. If you want more ancient history like this, subscribe.